The Crucible had been an enigma for over 10,000 cycles. A planet-sized anomaly drifting on the edge of known space, locked in gravitational chaos, surrounded by the wreckage of ships that had come too close. It was said to be a trial of the gods, an ancient test left behind by a precursor race that vanished long before the first FTL drives hummed to life. Few species ever dared to send expeditions. Fewer still returned. Those who did battle-hardened Rigelian shock troopers, the cybernetic Vrex, the hulking war forms of the Gornak horde, came back broken, their voices trembling as they whispered, "That place is not meant for life." For 1,000 years, no one had attempted it. Until the humans arrived. You said it was impossible? The Galactic Concord Council had been in session when the news broke. A collection of the most powerful species in the universe gathered in their floating citadel, debating policy, war, and trade when the transmission flickered to life. Humanity has entered the Crucible. A silence deeper than space itself filled the chamber. What? Came the guttural rasp of Overlord Zalkar, his claws tightening on the stone table. His species, the Drogzir, had lost an entire fleet attempting to breach the Crucible's atmosphere. You mean they sent drones? No, they sent themselves. The chamber erupted into chaos. The Seleni, a species known for their neural supremacy and cold logic, scoffed. Surely this is a jest. No species enters the Crucible willingly. Yet they have, said the Concord's intelligence officer. Not only have they entered, but they have deployed multiple survival teams, all with zero extraction protocols. The warlords and senators looked at each other in disbelief. No species entered the Crucible without an emergency failsafe, a fleet in waiting, a guarantee of rescue. But the humans? They had come alone. Touchdown. Hell itself. The planet's surface was a nightmare given form. The sky shifted from electric violet to pitch black in the span of minutes. Radiation storms tearing through the land with enough force to peel metal from ships. The ground was alive, a twisting, shifting terrain of organic metal and volcanic stone. And then there were the creatures. Some had no faces, just pits of hunger that opened in the dark. Others had too many faces, their forms fluid and predatory, shifting like shadows given flesh. Most could smell fear, but none had ever smelled humans before. And that was a problem. Survival is just another Tuesday. Commander Avery Blake looked up from her datapad as a 3-meter-tall insectoid horror loomed over their camp, its chitinous body dripping acid, mandibles twitching. "Hey, Carter," she called over her shoulder. "Yeah? You got the flamethrower?" Carter grinned. "Do I?" A moment later, the air ignited, blue fire engulfing the creature as it let out a screech that rattled bones. The thing collapsed, twitching, its acidic blood sizzling against the rock. Avery sighed. "Well, that's one way to cook dinner. You think it's edible?" Carter nudged the corpse with his boot. "Doubt it, but I say we try anyway. Worst case, we evolve a second stomach." Behind them, the alien mercenary Viekaris, one of the few non-humans who had joined the expedition, stared in horror. "You people are insane." Avery shrugged. "Welcome to the Crucible." The galactic broadcast. The Concord had been watching. Every major species with a war fleet, an empire, or a reputation to uphold had tapped into the emergency Crucible feed, expecting to see humanity wiped out within hours. Instead, they saw something else. The human camps grew. Where others had perished in days, humans built. They reinforced shelters against gravity spikes, turned predator corpses into weapons and armor, and even found ways to tame some of the lesser creatures. One particularly harrowing moment, captured live on the feed, showed a human running full speed toward a 6-legged carnivore, a makeshift spear in hand. "What is he doing?" one alien commentator gasped. The human leapt, the spear slamming into the beast's skull, forcing it into a roll. A moment later, the human stood atop the corpse, victorious. The alien audience screamed. One of the most feared creatures in the Crucible, something that had torn through entire war platoons, had just been killed by a dude in a tank top. The fear sets in. Overlord Zalkar watched the footage in growing horror. How is this possible? The Selene diplomat, her neural implants overclocking from sheer disbelief, whispered, "They are adapting." And that was the moment the galaxy understood. The Crucible had never been beaten because it wasn't just a test of strength. It was a shaping force, a gauntlet that forged species into something stronger. Most species broke. Most species ran. But humans? They thrived. And the galaxy suddenly realized that in their desperate attempt to watch humanity fail, they had just witnessed the birth of something far worse. The first species to ever conquer the Crucible. They're not human anymore. Somewhere in the depths of Helheim, a new signal pulsed. A call long forgotten by the precursor race that had designed the Crucible. It recognized change. It recognized victory. And it began to respond. The signal awakens. Deep beneath Helheim's surface, something stirred. The Crucible had existed for millennia, a testing ground for apex species, yet none had ever endured long enough to trigger the next phase. The algorithms, buried in ancient precursor code, recognized the anomaly. A new variable had emerged. Humans. For the first time in 10,000 cycles, the Crucible adapted. Did the planet just turn itself up to 11? At Camp Epsilon, the human outpost carved into the side of an obsidian ridge, the tremors started at dawn. Commander Avery Blake was midway through skinning a razor beast. Its hide had ballistic-resistant properties, perfect for armor, when her datapad glitched. The feed from their drone network cut to static. Then, every sensor in the base screamed in warning. Gravity shift detected. Extreme levels. Seek immediate shelter. Avery looked up. The sky, previously a roiling storm of violet and black, was now fracturing. Lightning forks split across the horizon in impossible geometric shapes, and the ground lurched sideways. Carter, standing by the comms array, barely had time to grab onto something before the pull of gravity snapped left. Men and equipment slammed against the walls as Helheim's physics rewrote itself midair. Status. Avery barked, gripping a rock outcrop as her feet left the ground. Carter's voice came through, distorted by the planetary interference. Gravity cycling like a goddamn washing machine. 1.2 G, 3.4 G, 0 G. Hell, I think I just saw a rock float upwards. The entire terrain was shifting. Mountains that had stood for centuries cracked apart, their structures suddenly unnatural. Lakes turned into spiraling vortexes. The Crucible had sensed the human survival and decided to escalate. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the Galactic Concord broadcast continued, now filled with terrified commentary. Alien warlords, high-ranking diplomats, and strategists watched in stunned horror as Helheim, an unbeatable, static nightmare world, began changing dynamically. One of the Selene neural tacticians, an expert in probability mechanics, ran 1,000 simulations in her head. This isn't an environmental change. The planet is testing them. It's learning. Overlord Zalkar, who had once sent his greatest champions into Helheim only to watch them die screaming, clenched his mandibles. This cannot be allowed to continue. If humans survive this, a pause. Then a whisper of pure dread. They will return from the Crucible as something far worse. Adapt or die, boys. Back on Helheim, Avery and her team had stopped trying to fight the planet and started exploiting it. Okay, new rule, she shouted over the comms. If the ground tries to kill you, kill it back. Carter, still grinning like a maniac, launched an explosive harpoon into an incoming boulder, shattering it before it could flatten their outpost. Best camping trip ever. One of their Xenotech specialists, Vasquez, had been working on a theory before the planet lost its mind. Now, she was screaming into her datapad. I knew it. It's an AI-controlled testing ground. The planet isn't just changing randomly, it's watching us. It's studying our responses. Avery's grip tightened on her rifle. Good. Let's teach it something new. The signal continued to strengthen. The Crucible had tried unpredictable terrain. It had sent horrors from the void. It had warped the very fabric of physics. Yet the humans thrived, so it did something it had never done before. It opened the final vault. Guys, I think we just found God's panic room. The entrance was buried beneath miles of obsidian rock, but Vasquez's scanners picked up something strange. A doorway, but not just any doorway. This thing was ancient, covered in non-Euclidean geometry that made the mind ache just to look at. The patterns weren't static, they shifted in real time, reacting to their presence. As Avery and her team approached, their weapons raised, the door split apart into thousands of fractal pieces. And beyond it, a chamber untouched by time. In the center stood a monolithic console, pulsing with an energy signature that didn't exist on any known spectrum. And written across the console in a language older than the stars was a single phrase: Final Ascension, species limit reached. Meanwhile, in the Galactic Council, panic. Pure, unfiltered panic. The entire Concord was now in emergency session. Every empire, every fleet, every military strategist had one priority: stop the humans. The Drogzir warlords, one of the most feared military factions in the universe, were the first to break silence. We have to annihilate them before they leave that planet. The Selene tacticians were already predicting the future. If humanity survived the final test, they wouldn't just be a deathworld species. They would be something else. Something that evolved beyond the need for an empire, for laws, for limits. Something unstoppable. We can't let them leave that planet alive. Back on Helheim, Avery stood before the ancient console, running her fingers over the glowing inscriptions. Well, Carter asked, impatient as ever. What's it say? Avery's lips curled into a grin. It says, she tapped the final activation sequence. A deep, resonating pulse rippled through Helheim, sending a signal across the stars. It says we just won. The emergency session of the Galactic Concord was unlike any before it. Warfleets had been assembled for lesser reasons: border disputes, pirate incursions, rogue AI uprisings. But this was something else entirely. The humans had survived the Crucible of Helheim. Worse, they had activated something buried beneath its surface. Every species with a military presence had accessed the feeds, their top tacticians watching in stunned horror as a pulse of unknown energy rippled outward from the planet, moving faster than light, passing through every known sensor array. The Selene tacticians were the first to understand the implications. This is not just a distress beacon. One of them rasped, their neural implants glowing from overclock processing. It is a claim. A claim? Overlord Zalkar spat. The tactician nodded grimly. A claim to the Crucible's final reward. Humanity is no longer being tested. They have been chosen. Silence fell over the War Council. Then the orders came. Deploy the fleet. They must not leave that planet alive. The armada that emerged from Slipstream above Helheim was the largest ever assembled for a single species. Thousands of warships, bristling with planet-cracking weapons, antimatter warheads, and enough firepower to turn a solar system into a cautionary tale. The Drogzir warfleets took the vanguard position, 1,000 brutal war barges, their hulls still scarred from centuries of conquest. Behind them, the Selene supercarriers floated, their neural warfare systems already locking onto human command frequencies. And in the core of the formation sat the Oblivion-class dreadnought, a behemoth of a ship known simply as Final Judgment. There would be no negotiations, no ultimatums, no mercy. Humanity would die here. Planetary surface, we have a problem. Avery was still running diagnostics on the precursor console when her helmet HUD flashed red. Incoming vessels. Estimated hostile force, 10,000 plus. Ordnance, planetary extermination class. Tactical response, none available. Carter, standing next to her, let out a low whistle. Oh yeah, that's a lot of red dots. V.A. Karras, their only surviving non-human ally, froze in place. His mandibles quivered. They sent the Concord fleet after you? Avery cracked her neck and pulled her sidearm. Guess they're scared. Vasquez, still analyzing the console, suddenly looked up in alarm. Ah, you guys? I think they made a mistake. Carter blinked. What do you mean? Vasquez pointed at the console, where alien symbols shifted into something unmistakable. Final ascension. Species limit reached. Defensive protocol engaged. The Crucible had made its choice. Helheim was no longer a battlefield. It was a fortress, and humanity was inside. The first wave of bombardments began with kinetic rods, city-sized tungsten slugs fired at orbital velocity, enough to crack a continent in half. The planet below should have been annihilated. Instead, the rods never hit. The moment they entered the atmosphere, they froze mid-air, suspended in place by an invisible force. The Drogzir commander, watching the bombardment, snarled, "What trickery is this?" Then came the EMP strikes. A dozen Stellar-class disabler bombs dropped, meant to overload every electronic system on the surface. Except, they detonated mid-orbit. The energy from the blasts curved back, redirected toward the fleet itself. Before the warfleets could even comprehend what was happening, half their sensor arrays fried. Then the planet spoke. A pulse of alien energy surged from the Crucible's surface, rewriting gravity itself. One of the Selenese supercarriers, unable to compensate, was yanked downward at impossible speed. It vanished into the clouds, a brief, panicked scream escaping over the comms before. Boom! A fireball the size of a moon erupted from the impact. The Concord fleet commanders panicked. Helheim was fighting back. Avery and her team felt it before they saw it. Something in their bones changed. The moment the Crucible activated, every human on the surface felt their perception shift. Colors were more vibrant. Time felt slower, and instinct sharpened beyond anything natural. Carter gasped, flexing his fingers. "I can feel the planet." V.A. Karras staggered back in horror. "This isn't just defense. The Crucible, it's merging with you." Vasquez turned to Avery. "You know what this means, right?" Avery smiled, gripping her rifle. "Yeah, it means we win." The Concord fleet had assumed this was an extermination mission. Instead, it became a massacre. The humans emerged from their shelters, eyes glowing with newfound power, their movements unnaturally fast, their reflexes inhumanly sharp. The fleet tried to deploy ground troops. The first wave of Drogzir shock troopers touched down in drop pods, only to be met by humans who moved like ghosts, dodging energy blasts, tearing through armored warforms with nothing but enhanced reflexes. A human scout was caught on a live feed, jumping 40 meters straight up, landing inside an enemy gunship, and hijacking it midair. The Concord warlords watched in stunned horror as their unstoppable army was torn apart by creatures who should not exist. "Pull back!" screamed a Selenese admiral. "They're not human anymore. There's something worse." In the Galactic Concord war chamber, Overlord Zalkar watched the chaos unfold. He had thought this would be the end of humanity. Instead, it was their ascension. The last transmission from the fleet before contact was lost played on the screen. It was Commander Avery Blake. Her face, still human but different. Sharper. Something behind her eyes had changed. She grinned. "You came here to kill us. You failed. Now it's our turn." And with that, the signal cut. The fall of the Galactic Concord. The news spread like wildfire. The unstoppable warfleet, the might of the Galactic Concord, had been annihilated. Not by an enemy empire. Not by a rogue AI uprising. Not by a cosmic anomaly. By humans. By the very creatures the Concord had classified as Deathworld savages just a few centuries ago. And now, those savages had survived the Crucible of Helheim. They had unlocked something ancient, something terrifying. They had become more than human. The galaxy watched in horror as the humans' final transmission echoed across every major communication hub. "You came here to kill us. You failed. Now it's our turn." That was all it took. The Galactic Concord, the oldest and most powerful ruling body in the universe, collapsed overnight. The first to fall were the weakest empires. The Vishari Trade Syndicate, a species built entirely on diplomacy and economic control, simply vanished. Their fleets disbanded, Their ruling families fled into the void, and their planets fell into chaos. "There's no point in resisting," whispered one Vishari merchant in a desperate transmission. "The humans are coming. The Crucible chose them. Nothing can stop them now." Some of the wealthiest warlords and politicians fled to the edges of known space, dumping entire vaults of credits, technology, and weapons as they ran. They had seen the final battle reports. They had watched humans walk through plasma fire, their bodies adapting mid-combat. They had seen human scouts outrun dropships, their movements impossible to track with standard AI. They had witnessed a single enhanced human slaughter an entire battalion of Drogzir warforms barehanded. The galaxy had no counter-strategy, so it ran. One by one, entire civilizations collapsed under their own fear. On Krognos 7, the ruling council, once one of the most feared military dictatorships in the galaxy, executed itself rather than face what was coming. On Torvin Prime, the planet's entire defense fleet surrendered before a single human ship arrived. And on Drogzir Prime, the homeworld of the warlike overlord Zalkar, a desperate final message was broadcast before their communications went silent. A shaky, terrified Drogzir general, his mandibles twitching in panic, stared into the transmission feed. They're not human anymore. We fought them. We sent everything we had. We were gods compared to them. And they laughed. A pause. A breath. Then the screen cut to static. Hours later, satellites detected mass orbital evacuations from Drogzir space. Their mighty war empire had fallen. Not to war, not to invasion, to fear. The Galactic Concord's high table, once the unquestioned authority over 1,000 star systems, was silent. The last remaining leaders, a handful of Seleni tacticians, Vishari diplomats, and broken Drogzir warlords, gathered for one final meeting. The room was filled with paranoia. "What if the humans aren't coming for us?" whispered one of the Seleni strategists. "What if they already control everything?" The Vishari Prime Minister, once a master of political manipulation, was shaking. "We can't fight them. No fleet in existence can stop them. If we attack, they'll only evolve again." Silence. Then one of the last surviving Drogzir generals spoke. His voice was hoarse. "Weak. Then we run." The High Table, once the most powerful governing body in history, dissolved itself. With no formal surrender, no treaty, no final battle. The leaders simply fled, some into the void, some into unmapped sectors of the galaxy. Others took their own lives rather than risk being found. The Galactic Concord had not been conquered. It had abandoned the galaxy. For the first time in 10,000 cycles, the universe was leaderless. Entire sectors of space, once ruled by strict laws and fleets of enforcers, were now empty. Pirates and warlords took what they could, scrambling to carve out power in the vacuum. But they all knew it wouldn't last. Because the humans had not yet made their move. They had not claimed territory. They had not issued demands. They had not revealed what they had become. They had simply let the galaxy destroy itself in terror. And now they were ready. On Helheim, the sky had settled into an eerie calm. The storms had faded. The fractured gravity anomalies had stabilized. The Crucible had served its purpose. It had chosen its champions. Avery stood at the peak of a newly formed obsidian spire, looking at the countless ships now under their control. The humans had survived hell itself, and now hell belonged to them. Carter adjusted his gloves, flexing his fingers, feeling the power that now coursed through his body. "What now, Commander?" he asked, smirking. Avery smiled, her eyes glowing faintly. "We let them run. We let them panic. And when the galaxy is too broken to resist, then we take it." As she spoke, 100 human ships born from the Crucible's technology activated in unison. The final stage of evolution had begun, and the universe would never be the same.